Narcissists always refuse to accept responsibility for their own behaviour, and one of the main ways that they do that within family court is by using the DARVO tactic. So that's what we're going to discuss in this video. Before I get started, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the channel below to get more notifications of these videos. So first up, what is DARVO? For those of you who aren't aware, it is the deny, attack, and then reverse the victim and offender roles. So let's break that down. So first off, they deny that they've done anything wrong at all. They absolve themselves of any guilt that they might feel about something that they have done. They then go on the attack. So they will instead point the finger at you for something that you've done or blame you. Like even if they do admit that they've done something, it's your fault. They then reverse it by saying, I'm the victim here. How dare you accuse me? How dare you doubt me? You're so abusive, and that's the reverse. Now, this is essentially a psychological defense mechanism. It is their inability to self-reflect, to challenge their fragile sense of self, and so it's a shield. Hence why I've called this video the Narcissist Shield. So they use it to protect that very fragile inner self, that false self that they have created, that they are perfect, that they can't do anything wrong, that everything is everyone else's fault, that the world is dangerous, that people are dangerous. And unfortunately, that damages your sense of self in the world. It is the projection of their own insecurities, which is, it's gaslighting as well, but it essentially is asking you to take responsibility for them and everything. You know, your behaviour, their behaviour, everything that's wrong in the world. There's a, hurricane in Texas and it's your fault. Everything is your fault. And that's the relationship. So let's have a look at this in real life. So one of the most common ways that I see this is within the family court scenario, because that's my client base. And it's when the victim goes to court to either talk about or try and get arrangements regarding the children. So like I say, this is my particular area that I work within. So this is the example that I'm going to give. And that might be either from a protective sense or gaining access. So what the narcissist will do is they're initially, so internally, the fear that is already alive within them, because you've separated, you're no longer together, the shame that comes with that this broke down, people will think that there's something wrong with me, that goes into hyperdrive. And so they've got to do everything they can to protect this image of it not being their fault, they've done nothing wrong. And so when they get in family court, obviously that's under a microscope. And unfortunately, the nature of family court is so adversarial that it's set up to create a blame environment, which narcissists play into perfectly. And so you go in and say, my ex isn't letting me see the children, or, my ex has abused me for years, and boom, straight away, even maybe sometimes even before you get a chance to put in your statement, they have filled in their application with a ton load of false allegations against you. And that is all part of that reversing. They've reversed the victim and offender role straight off the bat. So then everything that they do from there on in they will use that. So they'll deny everything that they've done and instead place the blame at your door. And unfortunately in family court, even though DARVO, this synonym has been around for quite a while now, they're still not great at spotting it. And so it can gather some momentum. And in cases where those allegations are made against a parent and they're quite severe, this can lead to alienation. This can lead to a restriction of contact between a parent and a child. And that can be mothers and fathers that are alienated and alienating. And this is the ultimate DARVO tactic in motion. So you go and say, look, I'm being stopped from having contact with my children. I would just like to have, equal access to them. And they say, no, you can't have equal access because you are a monster. You've done this, you've done that, you've done the other. And they're so emotionally seductive because they believe that they are the victim. That is just who they are from childhood when they were a victim. They have stuck with that victim narrative throughout their entire life. And so they genuinely believe it. And that's very convincing for people, particularly people who are rescuers by nature. They are people that want to fix the situation. You don't go into sort of social work or even family court, that environment, if you don't have some element of being a rescuer. You want to fix the world's problems. I know, I did it. And so it's incredibly manipulative of that whole setup, not just the adversarial side, but also the personality types of the people who work within the system as well. So they spurt all of this out, all the reasons that you're awful. And like I say, this is because they can't be seen as anything being their fault. And being able to turn the children against you adds to that narrative for them and that internal belief that it must be you that's the problem. And so they go at it with all of their might. And like I say, unfortunately, courts aren't great at spotting this, and it can gain momentum. So usually I find with clients that, they've got an awareness of what's going on, but they're still coming out of the fog, particularly when they come to me, usually at the start of the process, and they're not seeing everything because they're just waking up, like essentially from this coma of a relationship. They are waking up and just their memories are struggling because they've got complex PTSD. The world doesn't make a lot of sense to them. Their behaviours don't make a lot of sense. So it's sort of talking them through and helping them to understand some of these behaviours and being able to understand the psychology behind it. Because if we can understand the psychology, then we have a better chance of predicting next steps because they will follow a pattern. And so how do you spot it? Well, you look for that pattern. You look for a pattern whereby someone never accepts responsibility, someone who is stuck in that victim status, someone who blames you for everything. I have actually included, and I put the link below, a link to our evidencing DARVO workbook, which contains more information about the DARVO behaviours and specific behavioural patterns for you to look for to evidence. So you're not just going into the court and saying, oh, they're using DARVO. You're able to say and evidence they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing the other. And that is how you show it to court. I've jumped ahead of myself a little bit, but what we're also looking for here is language patterns. So it's that deflection of, it's not me, it's you. I didn't do that, you did that. Why are you getting angry about that? Everything is boom, wall up, defense. Anytime they are challenged, that defensive nature, it's like a cat that's cornered, they go on the attack mode. So watching for those language patterns, they're quite easy once you know what you're looking for, because it's a lot of what is coming out of their mouth does fall into that. But it's also this emotional reaction that you have. So you are also key. So I'm massively into the profiling element. I enjoy that for some reason. It's part of my makeup thing to make me feel safe at some point. But So the profiling element always looks at the victim and offender roles. So the offender, we understand the psychology of that, the defense mechanism, but you are also an important part of this. It's you. How do you feel when you're on the receiving end of this? Are you going, hang on a minute, how did that happen? How did that conversation go from me asking them, how did this happen, to me feeling like I've done something wrong? You know, that constant feeling of, that is a sign that you are experiencing DARVO. And obviously within the family court process, then it's, you go in with evidence thinking, okay, I've got this evidence, it's sorted, it's clear, and boom, you're hit with all these excuses and this projection and deflection, and you're like, what? How did that happen? And this is DARVO in action. Now, obviously, that kind of behavior it's really disorientating, because you're constantly having to bounce off the next thing that is coming at you. In relationships, you never want to raise everything. So even in a parenting relationship, so after you've separated and there's children involved, and you're trying to organise new shoes for school. We've just gone back to school. You're trying to organise new shoes, and you ask them, do you want to get the new shoes or shall I get them? And suddenly you're hit with a barrage of, I would have done this, blah, blah, blah. I bought them last time. It's attack all the time. And whilst that isn't, I mean, it is DARVO because it's denying their responsibility and attacking you and playing the victim, whilst it wouldn't necessarily be a big thing in court, it's for you to just recognise and the feeling of that. So how do you defend against that? Well, the first thing is for you. You have to stay in your truth. You have to know the facts, which is why, for me, your evidence is so important here. So I work with Evidence Tracker. It's something I've designed, and it's part of our court preparation toolkit. You can buy it separately, and I'll put links to both of those things below. And it's like a running record of everything that goes on, but in a spreadsheet format. And so you are able to, as you go along, record it and what it is, so that you can keep your sanity, so that you're not getting lost in the false narrative. You are not constantly battling. And once you recognise this pattern, you can just see it for that. You don't need to get embroiled in it. You can stay out of it. Set your boundary and step back. I'm not getting involved. I'm not going to play, and I'm not going to join this word salad that is going on this back and forth. I'm just going to step back from it wherever possible. So those are the sort of three things. So stay grounded in your own truth, document everything that will help with that, and set clear boundaries. Now, obviously, there's support available either through Get Court Ready or the Nurturing Coach that offers therapy if you're really struggling with the gaslighting and the effects of that on your brain and the PTSD. I recommend the Nurturing Coach. Again, I'll pop a link below to that. They are specialised in qualified therapists, and we solely work with the victims of narcissistic abuse and parental alienation. So this is our bread and butter. We understand it. We get it. So the emotional impact of that gaslighting and confusion that you feel, you can talk that through. You can process it. There's an image of the ball of string and a therapist pulling it out. That's what we can do. This huge ball of string that's been your entire relationship and every interaction you're now having, we can help you to unpick that, to stay grounded in that truth. And it's not a weakness for this to take an emotional toll. I describe it as, you've broken your leg and someone keeps kicking it. It is not going to heal if someone keeps kicking it. So getting help, you do that if you broke your leg. You go and you get it put in a cast. Consider us your cast. Consider us your protective mechanism around you. Now, obviously, we can't protect you out there in the real world, but we can protect your emotional space for you. And this is all part of breaking that cycle of you not playing into it, but also recognizing it for what it is, that psychological defense, and not feeling triggered by that. You know, well, they're doing that again, fine. Okay. You can also, once you understand their psychology, you can find ways to communicate that are less triggering for them. Not, their triggers are so vast and so deep that you're never going to avoid them. But we can find ways to make them more predictable so that you don't press every single button every single time in every conversation. But again, that's about self-awareness as well. You need to know your triggers so that you're not going into a conversation triggered, which, boom, boom, it's just everyone's blowing up all over the place. So, I mean, I've spoken about this before, and there's a blog again, I'll pop a link to that if you're interested, about the baby reindeer situation, which I've got to admit I am pretty fascinated with, because it shows all of these behaviours playing out in public, and it's got so much traction, pretty much like the, Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation of this woman, this Fiona Harvey, who I think we can now say categorically did stalk Richard Gadd. And he was, he did this play and he'd been doing it at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for a few years, and then Netflix picked it up and they ran it, and they made some artistic changes to it. At the start they said this is a true story. There's an argument that it was Donnie, the character, that was typing its true story, so it was Donnie the character's true story. But anyway, obviously it didn't. It painted Fiona, who played. It was the character was called Martha. I'm sorry if I'm teaching you something you already know, but I will get to my point. Martha stalked Donnie, and it was just these years and years of endless messages, turning up at his place of work, getting aggressive. She really believed she was in a relationship with this guy, and although he made mistakes, he certainly never implied that they were in a relationship or gave any obvious green lights that they were in a relationship, sorry. And yet she believed all that, and she did it. What was come out since is, she had an interview with Piers Morgan where she lied constantly. And now we're in court and documents have been released. And actually, the show painted her in a much better light. But anyway, the DARVO part of this, which I've written about in the blog, is that, first off, she's completely denying that she has stalked him. Completely. Even though there is now evidence in court of hundreds if not thousands of emails that she sent to him, voicemails, hours and hours of voicemails, turning up, sending him things through the post. She's denying it and claiming to be the victim. Oh, he's had a go at me, he's psychotic, he's an alcoholic. You know all of these. You've heard all of these excuses, and she's doing them. And she's, like I say, she's using DARVO to try and switch this up to paint Richard Gadd as being the bad guy. And she has a group of supporters. Anyway, because people don't understand what is going on here. And whilst, I'm not going to, Fiona has problems, and she's a human being, and I wish no harm upon her whatsoever, I find it fascinating because of these behaviours. So, if you haven't seen it, do check out some of that. But like I said, I will pop my DARVO related blog about that as well. But I think it's a really interesting real life public playing out of these behaviours. So how do you communicate that to a judge? How do you communicate? And again, we're going to see this through the baby reindeer court trial. Evidence. Richard Gadd has got so much evidence that they did all of this. And I know you have, because narcissists are great at giving you evidence. They give it you in barrel loads. And the problem is, it's so two problems. One, it's so covert, so it is subjective in part because it's part of that bigger picture of how they've made you feel in that relationship. And also, there's so much spread over such a long period of time that those little increments as one-off incidences don't look like much. It's only when you see the whole thing played together. So I describe it as a Polaroid. You know, if you just look at the Polaroid, you can't see the whole thing. You need a video to see the whole thing. And so your evidence presented in the right way provides a video rather than a Polaroid. And so it's about you being very clear with what you're presenting. And again, in the workbook that I've popped the link to below, it will show you how to, some of those specific behaviours that you're looking for, rather than, like I say, using the acronym itself, the behaviours underneath it and how you can evidence it. And then get caught ready, or your own, create your own spreadsheet or organise it however you want. I've created something that works particularly well for people in your situation, the evidence tracker, and that's within the court prep toolkit. And these are all ways that you can pull out those patterns of behaviours. So to finish off, DARVO is a psychological shield that the narcissist will use to deflect any attention or anything that paints them in a bad light and put it all onto you. You are the problem. I'm a victim. You are the problem. That's their mindset and their genuine belief that is true. And for you, that is not only gaslighting of your entire experience, but it's also so damaging, like literally so damaging. It can massively affect your mental health and well-being because you feel like you're constantly having to prove yourself, constantly having to argue what the truth is, and it shifts and changes, and you're being darted around all over the place with these constant attacks, and that's exhausting and overwhelming and draining. But we get it. So if you need that support, please do reach out. I'll pop the list of resources below. It is not a weakness to ask for help. Please do remember that. Know that we're here for you. And take care. Do drop your comments below. Don't forget to like and share if you think anyone else would benefit from this video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.